I'm McKinney Smith. In 2009, while going through a divorce, I decided to jump straight into entrepreneurship. In 2012, I lost my sister and asked myself, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Since then, I've become a serial entrepreneur, helping other women publish their books, produce their podcasts, and reach their big goals to walk in their greatness. I realized the importance of sharing our stories of resilience and how it can be another's guide to walk in a manner worthy of their calling. We are blessed to be a blessing, so get ready to be blessed with an inspiring testimony. Hey, Legacy Leavers. Thank you for joining us on the Walk in My Stilettos podcast, the top 1.5% most popular show in the world where we have conversations with extraordinary women that are letting us step into their shoes. I help women to own their voice, to create impact, prosperity, and legacy. I get inspired when I see another woman succeeding, but what interests me more is her backstory and her mindset on how she got there. So since you're already here, you may as well subscribe. Today, we have Nicole O. Salmon. She's a proud mother of a merging blended family of 5. She's a minister, strategist, author, and the purpose coach. She works with women to gain in-depth insight into who they are so they can live their lives with clarity, consistency, and confidence. Before stepping into full-time purpose and launching her own coaching firm, she worked in the not-for-profit sector for over 20 years. Specifically with organizations serving communities experiencing marginalization. She's also the founder of Preach Sis, a global movement and event for female Christian communicators. So please welcome to the show, Nicole Salmon.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story with us.
Thank you for creating spaces like this. It feels good to be here.
Yeah, it's honestly, I mean, I don't even know what to say sometimes because it's like I didn't intentionally start out this way, and I'm grateful for the feedback and the impact that it's making. So I'll just say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into the meat of your story, I love to find out a little bit about our guest beforehand. So before we get into the meat of your story, just as an icebreaker question, I'd love to, find out a little bit more about your beginnings, because I feel like as kids, we have these vivid imaginations of what we want to be and who we want to be, and we're able to fantasize and, create these worlds for ourselves. And then society, starts to try to limit us, and even our caregivers or family or loved ones start to limit us with their own limiting beliefs. So I would love to know, what did Nicole want to be when she was a little girl?
Wow. So first of all, as I was listening to your question, I started to tear up, and I'm not a crier. I'm not a crier. I started to tear up specifically when you said, you kind of start off this particular way and then, right?
Mm-hmm.
The limiting beliefs, the silencing. And that's something I identify with hugely. So as a kid, I think my first ambition that I can remember is I thought I wanted to be a teacher. Which technically isn't far off from what I'm doing now. It's just a different way of educating and informing people, right? So I wanted to be a teacher, thought I'd be in a classroom. My best friend and I were both going to go to the same school together and share dorm rooms and all of this stuff, until I started looking at the requirements to get into the program and some of the courses. And I was like, yeah, absolutely not. This doesn't feel like what I want to do, right? You kind of have this image in your head, and then I'm like, it doesn't align. And so in my last year of high school, the school that I attended had a program in the classroom for students with developmental disabilities, and I started volunteering there. I don't even remember how I got into that, but I started volunteering and I loved it. I loved working with them. And so after, a semester or two of doing that, I ended up applying to the developmental services worker program at Humber College, and with a specialized focused around behavioral modification. And then, as they say, the rest is kind of history.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. Okay. So fast forward, how,
Mhm.
okay, so share with us the journey and, how you got into being a purpose coach.
Yeah, so I think at the core, I believe that sometimes when we look back, I always say purpose leaves us breadcrumbs, right? So as
Mhm.
I look back, nothing was wasted. There was, even though I started out in developmental services, working with people in special needs, like it's exactly what I'm doing today, right? So I did that for a while, graduated, did that for a while. Like I said, I was most intrigued in working with those who had behavioral challenges that were keeping them from functioning in society. So, for example, I had this young man. He had spina bifida. He was nonverbal, and his family really wanted him to be able to eat dinner with them, but he
Mhm.
was always thrashing and just carrying on, right? And
Mhm.
so I worked with him, to really shift his behavior so that he could join his family. And really, at the core of everything I've been doing since has been, how do you shift your behavior, your mindset, your
Mhm.
lifestyle so that you can be more successful, right? And so that kind of led to me getting into career and becoming a career counselor. So I shifted from behavior to career, where my focus started to be around personality and temperament theory, and helping people understanding who they are, right?
Mhm.
And so I was working in the non-for-profit sector for almost 2 decades in Jane Finch here in Toronto, which is known as a community, a marginalized community, with youth who are at risk.
Mhm.
Um, and I did frontline for years, but then I moved into a management position, and I found after a while I wasn't so much interested in that employment piece and working with the youth. I started becoming keenly aware of staff development. I had a
Mhm.
very young team, and at that time, there was no leadership development for employees. And so I started meeting with my staff biweekly to do supervision. And I was like, listen, you're young, you're probably not going to retire here. What do you want? And
Mhm.
let me help you get the most out of your time here. And what I didn't realize was happening is I was practicing purpose. Like I was testing out
Mhm.
coaching, right? Without
Mhm.
even knowing that's what was happening. And yeah, that was happening in the background. And my heart was just feeling like it was time to go and do what I didn't know. But I just knew that the grace I had for the last like almost 20 years doing that work was leaving me, and it was time to just go out into the world and just try and see all the ideas, all the stuff that was in me. It was like, okay, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
Wow.
And within the first year of doing that, when I started looking back at all the things I was doing and developing and talking about, I realized there was a thread. I was always talking about purpose.
Mhm.
So even if I wasn't using the word, I was looking at my old tweets and Facebook posts. At the core of everything I was most passionately giving voice to, it was about, just deeply understanding who you are and embracing that and just kind of approaching life from that place. And so I started calling myself the purpose coach.
I love it. What you said in the very beginning there, purpose leaves us breadcrumbs. I wanted to pause
Mhm.
there and take a moment of silence. For the women who are listening, I want you to write that down. Purpose leaves us breadcrumbs. That'll definitely be your quote for the episode. Okay, speaking of purpose, I know that you lost your mother at 18 and you became a single mother at 19.
Mhm.
Oftentimes when we go through things in those early age, they shape who we become. Do you
Mhm.
feel like those experiences shaped who Nicole is today?
100%. So my mom was first diagnosed with cancer. I think I was probably around 15 or 16. So it was just the two of us. And by the time I started my first year of college, Her illness had gotten worse. I had to enroll and became her full-time caregiver.
Wow.
Right. So here I was as a little girl who should have been taking care of someone else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard. I put a lot on hold. And then of course, when she passed, I was then living on my own. So I was really living on my own since about 17, because I think that's when she went into palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, paying bills and, you know, just doing all adulting, just doing all of the adult stuff, you know, and having to be her advocate and my own advocate. And so that, I kind of grieve, like kind of looking back now, my childhood a bit, but it definitely, I remember one day, like fast forwarding, I was at my apartment and it was a Saturday and I like threw open the windows and the doors and I was cleaning and washing the walls and wiping down the light switches. And I kind of smiled to myself because I'm just like, you gave me all of that. You know what I mean? I'm like, you left, but you left me well. You know what I mean? Like I had what I needed, so to speak, to survive, not only domestically, but in other ways as well. I realized that she had imparted so much in the short time that I had her. And so, you know, when I had my son, I raised him kind of in the same way. I think I raised him thinking, if God forbid that, you know, I get called home prematurely, what is it that I want to leave behind? And so, you know, I know you address your audience as legacy leavers. I try to live my place from a legacy perspective. Like, what if I'm gone? Like, what will be left behind? What will I have impacted and imparted? I think being a church girl and like being in church at the time, and then, you know, subsequently the next year getting pregnant and now being a mother myself, that was really hard. You're a young Black woman, in church. The statistics and the perspective didn't look good. No one was excited, which I didn't expect them to be, but it was a very shaming experience. And it muzzled me. As a kid, I think I came out talking. I didn't have words, but I was that baby that cried a lot. I think it's because I always had something to say. And so speaking is my gift. My voice is my gift. But that experience and that shame that I felt, it silenced me. It silenced my voice. It silenced my talents. I would be in spaces where I had so much to contribute, but I would just hear like, just be quiet, you know, like you're just going to embarrass yourself again. And it's only going to be a matter of time before you do. And so that shame dialogue was like, it was raining. And so I felt like all the optimism around purpose and all the things I could possibly grow up to be, I felt like my purpose was canceled. I felt like my mistake. Yeah. Like, you know, the mistake and and getting pregnant out of wedlock and all of that, I felt like it canceled my purpose. And so for years, I sat silent.
Wow. I mean, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss and, you know, you having to experience that at such a young age. I know, you know, everyone processes grief differently, and our levels of grief, I find, are usually dependent on how close we are with that person. Just thinking about, I guess, the effects of how losing my loved ones affected me, I'd be interested to know, like, how do you feel losing your mom shaped who Nicole is today?
You're right. We all process grief differently. I'm only now processing McKinney. Like I have a therapist. I know it seems to be the popular thing to say now, but I have a therapist, and I'm only now deeply unpacking. I did not cry during that time. I just packaged everything up and I just soldiered on. And I think in terms of how it shaped me is it toughened me in a way that didn't serve me, I think I would say. I thought I had, like, I wore toughness as a badge of honor. I saw it as, you got to be this to be strong. You got to be this to be taken serious. Don't let nobody mess with you. Don't let anybody, right? And so I felt like I had to self-protect. I held on to relationships loosely. Because I was like, hey, it's whatever, like people come and go, right? So there was always an expectancy of people leaving my life that I didn't realize, when you say how it shaped me. And so I remember when I was in seminary, I remember I was having a difficult day. I went to the bathroom because I could feel myself crying, wanting to cry, but I'm like, I'm strong. I'm a soldier. I don't cry, right? Bad gal. I don't cry. So I left because I didn't want my emotions to surface, right? And the chef of the school, she was in the bathroom at the same time. She was a much older lady. She had been a single mom as well. And, deep calls onto deep, right? Like she didn't know my story, but pain recognizes pain and deep calls onto deep. And she just saw me and she could just read me, and she put her arms around me, McKitty, and she held me like with that mother's, like that mother hug. She held me and she said to me, you don't have to be strong. It's okay to be soft.
Yes.
And I wept and I wept and I wept. And I realized that after years of teaching myself and telling myself that I had to be tough, I now had to learn how to be soft and gentle and feel and experience relationships and let people in and trust and all of those things. And so I was probably in my early 20s when that moment happened. And I am still on a journey of grief, healing, unlearning a lot of what I thought I had to hold on to survive as a young single mom at that time.
Well, I have goosebumps. As, we, as I'm going to say specifically within the Black community, we experience a lot of trauma, early on, childhood wounds, childhood traumas, and our trauma responses, the way that we react in order to survive as we get older no longer serves us and affects our ability to thrive. So, when your mom passed away and you felt like, you needed to be strong and to do those things because you needed to do that in order to survive in that moment. But like you said, going through therapy now and learning to heal and unlearn things, it's realizing what you did then to survive, you don't need to do now.
Right.
For your relationships now. Like, ooh, I have goosebumps. Also what you spoke to about being a young mom. I, for one, I had my first child at 17. So I can totally relate to your story of, how society treated you. But I can only imagine having that extra layer. Like I wasn't in the church at the time. So I already know the judgment that comes with those environments. And I can only imagine the added layer of trauma that put on you on top of, being a young girl who's grieving the loss of her mother, who you were, helping also to take care of when she got ill. But now you're a young single mom of a small child again, like the layers of struggle that you had to deal with at such a young age. I'm a true believer in therapy. I think everyone needs therapy. So I would love if you could share with the listeners, like how therapy has actually helped you on your healing journey and helped you to be the best version of Nicole.
That's a really good question. You've used the word trauma a few times, and I didn't know that what happened to me was traumatizing. I never understood. I mean, I have a clinical background. I'm a coach, I'm a pastoral counselor. I understand trauma, but I never looked at everything that happened to me and said, Nicole experienced trauma. Therapy helped me to do that. Like I didn't recognize how difficult my formative years were. And so now as a mother, like, my son that I had at that time, he's going to be 23 this year. I have, four other kids. So we have a blended family of four. Our youngest is 11. And what therapy is teaching me is that I am not my mother and those children are not me.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I didn't realize was happening is I was parenting in an unhealthy way, because I was trying to protect them from the trauma I experienced without knowing it. So, for example, when I'm not well, I started to develop this habit of like, I would be homesick and I would be like sick. And then half an hour before my husband came home or the kids came home, I'd pop up, shower, get dressed, and look busy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't want them. I felt embarrassed to be seen unwell. And I realized that when I had to care for my mom, again, coming from Jamaican parentage, my mom's going through chemo. She's lost her hair. She's lost her ability to walk. But yet when people came over, it was my job as a child to get her wig out and steady it on her head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just prop her up and make sure she looked well,
Mm-hmm.
even though everybody knows that this woman is sick, right? And I learned in therapy that indirectly that experience taught me that illness is something to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so then as an adult, like, I was making myself sometimes more sick because I was trying to show up looking like I was well when I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one day my therapist said to me that you're not your mom. Your children are not you. You only had yourself. Your children have you, your husband, you have a village, you have a community. Go lay down. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I was worried the trauma that I experienced having to be a caretaker for a sick parent. I was worried. I'm like, I don't want to traumatize them. I don't want them to have to help. I don't want them to have to do anything. And so it really affected how I parented. It affected my self-care because trauma had taught me that was something you had to hide, feel ashamed of, and power through.
Mm-hmm. There's so much that you said that I want to unpack because I feel like, your story is an example of so many things where one, when we hear the word trauma, we are conditioned to believe that it has to be something catastrophic, like, sexual abuse or physical abuse or, something like that. I mentioned earlier as a culture, especially in the Black community, but I also know in many other cultures where there are things that we normalize where because we've normalized it in our community, we don't view it as trauma. Your therapist had to point out to you that what you experienced was trauma. And not all trauma is a capital T, and your experience with your mom, helping her to look well when, everyone knew she was not well. I think, especially again, in the Black community, we've been conditioned to make things look good instead of being able to process your feelings and to show up as our true authentic selves for the perception of others. We've been conditioned to make things look a certain way. And that has a huge effect on how we process through life, how we view ourselves. You talked about the therapist bringing you to that place of awareness to, one, recognize that what you went through is trauma, but two, to help you to reframe that and, that you are not your mom and your kids are not you. And that in turn helping you to parent differently. So I guess my next question would be like, how has motherhood changed you?
Wow. I'm not sure I know how to answer that because I think one of the other things that came up for me in therapy is that I've been in caretaker mode for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one day she was saying, like, what would it look like for you to not take care of everyone? And I couldn't answer it then. And I still struggle with answering that now. I can't picture a world where I'm not taking care because I started doing so really young. So becoming a mother, so one thing I can say about how motherhood has shaped me or changed me is as a young single mom, it definitely focused me.
Mm.
Right. So after my mom passed away, like my life got hectic. Like I dealt with grief by keeping busy. I was never home. I partied a lot, stayed out a lot, just anything I could do to not be still enough to think or feel, right?
Mhm.
And so that included getting into a relationship that that it wasn't based on love. It was based on grief, and in that relationship ending up getting pregnant. And so it focused me. It was the thing, like I was going at like 100 miles per hour in a really negative or really bad direction. And motherhood was the thing that focused and steadied me, because I had something to now think about outside of myself. So it really was an intervention. You know what I mean? I don't know what my therapist would say about me seeing it that way. But it was, and I know it's probably been said, but it did feel like the thing that saved me. The thing that people thought was going to ruin my life was actually the thing that saved it. And to this day, you know, that child, he's my greatest accomplishment. He continues to be my greatest accomplishment. And now with my bonus children, you know, I just get to, they're a lot younger, so I just get to kind of continue to share the parenting nuggets and wisdom as being a part of the village who's raising them. So
I love that. You know, you mentioned earlier, you know, because you became a mom at a young age and in the church environment, you felt silenced from the shame. So I have a two-part question. So like, how were you able to find your voice? And then what made you decide to get into ministry after that experience?
While it was a very silencing experience, there was still, I experienced a lot of love from my church family, right? So there was a segment of people who was like, we are just going to love on this little girl and help her with whatever she needed. And, you know, for everyone else who kind of had an issue, I was young, but I was feisty. And so, you know, like I've never been the kind to take slack from nobody. Right. And so I remember I grew up having to sit in the very front. That was my mom's rule. You don't sit in the back, you sit in the front. Right. Till this day, even if I go to a church I don't know, I try to find the closest seat to the front. Right. But as I started to get bigger and I'm kind of waddling my way down, I remember one of the leaders said to me that I was making people feel uncomfortable.
Oh, wow.
And then like, kind of like, how dare I just kind of parade my belly around, and that I needed to sit at the back.
Wow.
Which was also a tradition in many Black Pentecostal churches back then, right? You make a miss up, you sit in the back until they feel like you've earned your place in the kingdom again, right? You know, I was 18 and I said to them, I said, listen, I have always sat and worshiped at the front. Nothing has changed, right? I said, I made a mistake, but I have not fallen out of love and relationship with Jesus Christ. I said, if you put me in the back, I said, I promise you, I will walk past the back seat and out the door, and you will never see me again. So you decide. Am I sitting in the front today? Are you walking me to the back? Right. And I sat in the front, and I continued to sit in the front, you know. But there was a segment of people who really, they loved on me. They supported me. They never shared it at the time, but now as an adult looking back, I'm 99.9% sure that those were women who were also single moms, but no one knew their story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was their opportunity to reach across and give what they didn't have. And so I found love and community even within the circle of shame. And how did I find my voice? I describe it. I don't know if I can say I found it, but I describe it this way. I always say life places a demand on purpose. And at some point, it's like a boiling pot. It just cannot be, it can only be contained for so long, right? we're all familiar with the analogy of how pressure produces diamonds, but there's another one, there's another adage that says pressure busts pipes, right? Yep. And so like purpose contained and constrained is kind of like that. And that's what happened. Like over time, the bubbling up, it just could not be contained. And it started seeping out in how I showed up in life. It started seeping out in conversations. I would say God even pulled it out that even when I chose to be silent, he had people who wouldn't allow me to be silent, who would ask for my voice, who would ask for my gifts. And so it was only a matter of time. Life just kept placing a demand on what was in me. And at some point I just had to let it flow out. I had to let it flow out.
Wow. There's, I was thinking about what you said to the lady in church, and I'm like, okay, so you and I have quite a few things in common outside of being coaches and leaders and feisty women. We're also both introverts.
Yeah.
So I would love to know, like, what advice you would give to the women that are listening that are also introverts, because I know that, I get a lot of messages in my DMs from women that are like, outside of me verbalizing that I'm an introvert, they wouldn't know that just by what they see online or what I do. So they love the fact that, I'm honest about my personality and my struggles sometimes of, being in leadership roles. So I would love to know what advice you can give to the introverted women who are listening right now, because I know there are many who are holding themselves back, and I'm going to say using that as an excuse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I would say, one of the biggest things I've had to learn is, one, I think introverts are perceived as not being personable, right? But there's a difference between being a people person and being personable, right? And so I had to learn that you could still very much have a deep sense of calling to speak and share and serve people, even when you feel drained by being around people, right? And so I think that for introverts, I would say just start to create a lifestyle, because you and I both know that introversion speaks more to where we get our energy from, right? And so I've had to build a very fierce lifestyle around how I energize. So for example, when I speak, like on a Sunday, let's say, everything shuts down on a Monday. And I'm unapologetic about that. I don't feel guilty or bad about that. It's what I need. Right. And so, I think that you don't confuse the natural, maybe outspokenness of the extrovert as a confirmation that, yes, that person seems to naturally just think and speak out loud. So that's what they're called to do. And if I don't feel that, then I'm not called to do that. Again, life places a demand on your purpose. I could be the most quiet person. You can be the most quiet person in the room. But guess what? You put a mic in my hand, something very different happens. And so I would say, don't discount, right? The fact that you think inwardly and you don't talk a lot. Introverts have a lot to say. We like to be very intentional about when and how we speak and how we have impact. So I would say start to reframe how you see yourself. You don't have to be that loud life of the party to have something to say.
Absolutely. I love all of that advice. There was a book that I read last year that shifted my perspective on being an introvert. Quiet? Is that Quiet? Yeah, it's called Quiet. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's like something along the lines of like, how an introvert survives in a world of extroverts or something like that. But it totally shifted my perspective on being an introvert, and I'm going to say highlighted the strengths of introversion and how society has conditioned us to look at it as a weakness. And for anyone who's listening who, doesn't know what an introvert is, it's not just someone who is shy, but some general qualities of an introvert, someone who needs quiet to concentrate. We are more reflective. We like to go inward rather than outward. Some would say we're more self-aware because of that. We feel comfortable being alone. We need alone time to recharge rather than, extroverts who charge by being around people. Like you said, if you are speaking on a stage or at church on Sunday, Monday you have to take off. I'm very much the same. If I have to speak in an event, I'm exhausted the next day. Like I've depleted all of my energy. I feel completely tired after that. And a lot of introverts prefer to write things rather than to talk. So, speaking of you talking on stages, you're also an author. So I would love to know, like, what inspired you to write your first book?
So I was going through a difficult time and, I was like praying and I was like, oh, boohooing to God. And, he was just like, listen. So again, part of, I think the part of being sassy and a very direct communicator also means that that's how God communicates with me. Right. Mm-hmm. So he was just kind of like, look, why are you coming to me again? Like about this, like we've been here. We have done this already. We have done this before. You have been in these places of despair where you've cried out to me. I've given you instructions or some word of life or wisdom, and you've been able to pull yourself out of the pit and carry on. Why are you not writing this down?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, dang. Okay. So, he was just like, start writing it down. And so now, like with my clients, I always say to them, write clarity when you get clarity. Right. Mm-hmm. So it started out as a personal exercise of, writing down, you listen to a podcast like this, or you listen to a sermon, or you watch something on YouTube and you're like, you get so much clarity and you're like, oh yes, that's so good. Why aren't we writing that down? Right.
Yeah.
And so I started writing it down, and those life lessons and wisdom and words became my first book.
Wow. So for the women who are listening, I am going to repeat that. She said, write clarity when you get clarity. A tip that I add to that, I always keep notepads around. I've got sticky notes and notepads everywhere because I need to write things down or I'll forget. So that is definitely a great lesson right there. So I would love to know, with everything that you do, like what inspires you the most about what you do?
Transformation. So I have this weird thing where I'm not a fan of the word motivation or motivated. Like when people say, oh my gosh, like you inspired me or that motivated me, I don't feel full when I hear that. Mm-hmm. When someone says, whether I spoke or they read something I wrote or they took one of my courses, and then they learned how to actually implement and take action, like action, like even now I'm saying it. I know you can't see me, but my body posture shot up, like my eyes, like my pupils are dilated, like mm-hmm. action. And it doesn't have to be big. I'm not talking about I worked with someone and then they launched a business. I mean, anything, like any movement from point A to point A.5, that's just life-giving for me. That is absolutely life-giving.
Yes, I totally relate. Like I always say, like inspiration is great, but application is where it's at. Yeah. Because that's where you're going to get the transformation. That's where you're going to get the results.
Absolutely.
Okay. So before we go to the final segment of the show, I want you to tell people where they can stay connected with you online to learn more about you and from you.
Absolutely. So you can visit my website, www.Nicole, make sure that letter O is in there, Salmon, spelled just like the fish.com. So NicoleOSalmon.com. I live, you can find me. I live on Instagram. I live on Instagram, and then I visit my summer homes, being Facebook and Twitter and some of these other spaces. But if you plug Nicole O Salmon into just about any social media application, you can find me there. So Nicole O Salmon on Instagram, and everywhere else socials are found.
Awesome. So I'll definitely have your direct link so they can connect with you and they won't have to search too far. For the final segment of the show, I call it a walk in her wisdom. I, once upon a time, looked at it as a rapid fire, but it's not so rapid because I like to ask people to unpack sometimes. So I don't like rules. But let's try to keep your responses to either one sentence or one word. And I may ask you to unpack, like I said.
Okay.
All right, here we go. What keeps you up at night?
I'm going to need a second for that one. What keeps me up at night? So I'm not a up at night person, but I understand the sentiment of the question. I think if something is going to keep me up, it's, I would say, like breakthrough. Helping people break through. If I'm aware of something in my life or someone else's, or something is like they're stuck and it's binding them to something that is costing them destiny, that keeps me up. That keeps me up at night.
When and where are you the happiest?
When I'm by myself.
Introverts. What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received is, you are not responsible for the whole. You are one small pit stop in people's journey to their wellness.
Okay, what's the worst advice you've ever received?
I can't think of one specific advice, but I would say anything that includes any version of retaliation. Yeah, when someone's kind of like, go tell them, go check them, clap back. Any version of clapping back in retaliation out of emotions would be the worst advice.
What new belief, behavior, or habit has improved your life in the last 5 years?
So my newest habit is deep breathing. I practice deep breathing and mindfulness several times throughout the day. My watch reminds me that it's time to take a breath. And when it does, I realize there are so many moments where I'm actually not breathing and that my body is tense. And so it has allowed me to not only relax, but almost like come back to myself, come back into myself and be aware and present. So deep breathing this last year has really transformed my wellness.
I love that. I'm a strong believer in meditation and breath work. Okay, last but not least, if you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
It would say, where you are is not who you are. Where you are is not who you are. And the reason why is because a purpose coach, one of the fundamentals that I teach around purpose is that purpose is not a destination. It's a lifestyle. It's not a place you get to. It's a place you live from. And oftentimes we get stuck and we define ourselves by what's happening around us. And that's not just about bad things. It's about good things too. If we hang our identity on our accomplishments, that's a dangerous place to be. If we define our identity by our failures, that's also a very dangerous place to be. And so I think one of the most profound coaching pillars that I've been passing on to my clients and that I try to practice and live out daily is reminding myself that where I am is not the same thing as who I am.
Right. You've given us like so many quotables today, Nicole. Like you started with like purpose leaves us breadcrumbs. You gave us right clarity when you get clarity, and you're leaving us with where you are is not who you are. I love every single one of those. I just want to thank you, Nicole, for taking the time to join us, for sharing your story with us and being so transparent and giving us so many gems, within your story and your expertise. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome, McKinney. Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And to all of you legacy leavers out there, until next time, subscribe on all platforms. Don't forget to rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcast. I'm going to challenge you today if you can think of 3 women that would receive value from hearing Nicole's story and just learning from her gems and expertise. Please share it with them. Feel free to screenshot this week's episode, and you can tag us on Instagram. You can tag Nicole at Nicole O Salmon. You can tag myself at The Real McKinney Smith, and continue to walk in greatness in your stilettos in a manner worthy of your calling.